My son and daughter were delighted when I signed the contract. Hugs, tears, promises. But a few days later, they left me in a foreign country at the airport without any money. I sat in the waiting room. 2 hours later, I had 77 missed calls. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The pen felt heavier than it should have. 40 years of my life reduced to signatures on paper, and my own children couldn't even look me in the eye. 38 years I've built this business, and now... My voice trailed off as I stared across the mahogany conference table at Chester and Bertha. The silence stretched like a funeral shroud over the boardroom. Chester shifted near the window, his phone buzzing insistently against the glass surface. Third time in 10 minutes. He fumbled to silence it, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air conditioning humming at a comfortable 72 degrees. "Dad, you don't have to explain anything," Bertha said, her voice honey smooth as she leaned forward. She'd positioned herself closest to me, notebook open, pen poised like a weapon. "We understand this is difficult after Mom's passing." Milton Black cleared his throat from his seat to my right. "Percy, if you're ready to proceed, I have the transfer documents prepared according to your specifications." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the family tension crackling through the room. Chester's phone erupted again. This time, I caught the caller ID before he could decline. "Premium Collections." Sorry, he muttered, jamming the device into his jacket pocket. "Work stuff. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. Chester hadn't worked a real job in 3 years. "Milton, please read the terms aloud," I said, settling back in my leather chair. The city skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but I kept my focus on my children's faces. "The transfer agreement hereby grants Chester Robertson and Bertha Hunt equal ownership of Robertson Motors, effective immediately upon signature. All assets, including the main dealership, 2 satellite locations, and associated real estate holdings, valued at approximately $12 million, shall be divided equally between the aforementioned parties." Bertha's pen stopped moving. Chester's mouth fell open. "Dad, what are you saying?" Chester stepped away from the window, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I'm saying you're both now business owners." I picked up the fountain pen, feeling its familiar weight. "Congratulations." The transformation was immediate. Chester's shoulders relaxed for the first time since entering the room. Bertha's calculating expression softened into what might have passed for genuine emotion if I hadn't been watching so carefully. "But Dad, this is so sudden," Bertha said, though she was already scanning the documents. "Are you sure you're ready for this step? Your mother and I discussed this extensively before she passed. She wanted me to ensure you both were taken care of." The lie came easier than I expected. Margaret would have seen right through their act. Milton spread additional papers across the polished table. "There are several subsidiary agreements regarding management responsibilities, profit sharing, and decision-making protocols." Chester approached the table like a man seeing water after days in the desert. "This is really happening? The dealership is ours?" "Equally shared," I confirmed, though I'll retain a small advisory role in my private office for now. Bertha was already making notes in her book. "We'll need to establish new banking arrangements immediately and review the staff contracts. When can we access the financial records?" "Tomorrow morning," Milton replied. "I'll need both signatures on these documents first." Chester grabbed a pen before Milton finished speaking. His signature sprawled across the page in shaky letters. Bertha followed with her characteristic precise script. As the ink dried, she stood and embraced me. "Thank you, Daddy. This means everything to us." Over her shoulder, I watched Chester answer another call, this time with confidence instead of panic. "Yes, I understand the payment is overdue. Actually, my situation has just changed dramatically. I'll have a substantial payment for you by Monday." Substantial payment. Monday. 4 days away. Bertha pulled back from our embrace, her eyes bright with plans I wasn't privy to. "We should celebrate this weekend. Maybe take a family trip somewhere special?" "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." I signed my own name with deliberate strokes. "Though I hope you'll give an old man time to adjust to retirement." "Of course," she said, already moving toward Chester. They huddled near the window, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. Milton gathered the documents with professional efficiency. The transfers will be processed by close of business tomorrow. Congratulations, Percy. I know this wasn't an easy decision. After 40 years of reading people across negotiation tables, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Right now, every instinct screamed that I'd just signed my own death warrant. Chester and Bertha headed for the door, their excitement palpable. As they reached the hallway, I caught fragments of their hushed conversation. Mexico would be perfect. Travel insurance. Make sure everything's arranged. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone with the afternoon shadows and a growing certainty that my children had just revealed their true intentions. 5 days of watching my children had taught me more about them than 67 years of fatherhood ever had. I'd spent those days reviewing financial records, making discreet inquiries, and observing. Chester owed $200,000 to various creditors. Bertha had been researching vacation destinations and life insurance policies with suspicious thoroughness. Now, as I arranged place settings in the dining room I'd shared with Margaret for 35 years, I prepared to let them believe they were still in control. "Dad, you didn't have to cook," Bertha said, sweeping into the room with a bottle of wine and an armload of travel brochures. "We could have ordered something." "I enjoy cooking, keeps my hands busy." I placed the last fork beside her plate. "What's all that paperwork?" Chester appeared in the doorway, phone finally silent for the first time all week. "Hey, Pop, something smells incredible in here. Pot roast, your mother's recipe." I watched him take his usual seat at the far end of the table. "You seem more relaxed lately." "Business has been good," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Really good, actually." Bertha spread the brochures across the table like a dealer shuffling cards. "Speaking of business, I've been thinking we should take that family trip we discussed to celebrate our new partnership." The brochures featured pristine beaches, resort swimming pools, and couples walking hand in hand along shorelines. All Mexico destinations. "These look lovely," I said, settling into my chair. "When were you thinking?" "Soon," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she'd used since childhood when she wanted something. "Actually, I was thinking this weekend. There's a beautiful resort in Cancun with last-minute availability." Chester nodded enthusiastically. "The timing couldn't be better. We could fly out Saturday morning, spend a week relaxing. You deserve it after everything you've been through." I served the pot roast while studying their faces. Bertha had already moved past suggestion into planning mode, pulling out her tablet and scrolling through flight options. "Here," she said, turning the screen toward me. "This package includes everything. Flights, hotel, meals, even travel insurance. All we need to do is book it." "Travel insurance?" I asked casually, spearing a piece of carrot. "Standard policy," Chester said quickly. "Covers medical emergencies, trip cancellation, that sort of thing." "And other contingencies," Bertha added, her fingers dancing across the tablet screen. "The coverage is quite comprehensive for international travel." I pretended to consider while internally cataloging every word. Comprehensive coverage, medical emergencies, other contingencies. "The resort looks magnificent," I said finally. "How much would something like this cost?" "Don't worry about that," Bertha waved dismissively. "We can handle the expenses. Consider it our gift to you." Chester leaned forward. "Actually, I've already got my credit situation sorted out. Made some substantial payments this week. My credit limit's back to normal." Substantial payments, the same phrase he'd used Monday when talking to creditors. "That's wonderful, son. I'm proud of how you've turned things around." Bertha continued scrolling, then paused. "Oh, this is perfect. There's a beachfront suite available with ocean views. Very private, very secluded." "Secluded," I repeated thoughtfully. "For relaxation," Chester said. "Away from everything, no distractions." I watched Bertha bookmark the page, then navigate to travel insurance options. Her attention lingered on a particular policy section before she quickly scrolled past. "You know what?" I said, setting down my fork. "This sounds exactly like what I need. Book it." Their expressions brightened instantly. "Really?" Bertha's voice carried genuine excitement now. "You're sure? Completely sure? Life's too short to hesitate when opportunity presents itself." Chester pulled out his phone. "I'll call the travel agent right now. Get everything confirmed before the prices change." As he walked toward the kitchen, I heard him making the reservation. "Yes, 3 adults, March 23rd through 30th. The beachfront suite package you quoted earlier." Bertha gathered the brochures, her movements efficient and purposeful. I'll handle the travel documentation and insurance policies. We'll need your passport and some basic medical information. Of course, whatever you need. She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time in months. This is going to be wonderful, Dad. Just what our family needs. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Chester gesturing enthusiastically while finalizing arrangements. His voice carried clearly. Travel insurance? Yes, definitely include that. The comprehensive package. When he returned, his face glowed with satisfaction. All set. We fly out Saturday at 10:15. First class, naturally. First class, I mused. Must be expensive. You're worth it, Bertha said, already making notes about packing and preparations. As they discussed itinerary details, I excused myself to the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into my study and quickly photographed Chester's phone screen, which he'd left on the counter displaying the booking confirmation. The resort reservation, the flight details, the comprehensive travel insurance policy, everything documented. When I returned, they were clearing dishes and planning tomorrow's activities. We should shop for vacation clothes, Bertha suggested, and pick up some travel essentials. Sunscreen, Chester added. Lots of sunscreen for those beaches. Excellent suggestions? I smiled warmly at my children. I can't wait for our family trip. As they prepared to leave, I stood in the doorway watching them load into Bertha's car. Through the evening shadows, I could see them talking animatedly, their body language relaxed and confident. They thought they'd won. 7 days in a secluded Mexican resort, comprehensive travel insurance, medical emergency coverage, an elderly man prone to accidents in unfamiliar surroundings. But 2 could play this game. And I'd been playing it longer than they realized. The way Chester's face drained of color told me everything I needed to know about that phone call. Bertha shot him a warning look across the departure gate seating. They thought I was oblivious, absorbed in my newspaper. They were wrong. 16 days had passed since our family dinner, and I'd spent every one of them watching. Chester's creditor calls had intensified. Bertha had researched Mexican hospitals and international medical evacuation procedures with disturbing thoroughness. The comprehensive travel insurance policy she'd purchased covered everything from accidental drowning to sudden cardiac events. Sorry about that, Chester mumbled, stuffing his phone back into his wrinkled jacket. Work emergency. What work? The man hadn't held steady employment since his marketing firm collapsed 3 years ago. Bertha organized our boarding passes with military precision, keeping my documents separate from theirs. Dad, I'll hold on to your paperwork. Easier if everything's in one place. Of course, sweetheart. I folded my newspaper, noting how her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked my passport into her oversized purse. The flight to Cancun stretched ahead like a chess game, where I was finally beginning to understand my opponent's strategy. Chester fielded 2 more calls during boarding, each conversation conducted in hushed, desperate tones near the aircraft bathroom. Yes, I understand the consequences, I heard him whisper. Monday. I promise you'll have payment, Monday. Monday would be April 14th, 9 days away. Plenty of time for a grieving widower to suffer an unfortunate accident in paradise. During the flight, they huddled together across the aisle, their voices barely audible above the engine noise. I caught fragments through my pretended sleep. Resort has that secluded beach area. Medical response time is at least 40 minutes. Policy pays double for accidental. When we landed in Cancun, the tropical heat hit like a wall. Bertha immediately took charge of customs and immigration, speaking rapid Spanish to the officials while I stood silently beside her like an elderly tourist dependent on his children's guidance. At Hotel Presidente, she attempted to register the rooms in her name. Actually, I interrupted pleasantly, I'd prefer the reservation under Robertson, Percy Robertson. The desk clerk smiled professionally. Of course, Senor Robertson. You have the beachfront suite, correct? Very beautiful view. Bertha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dad, it's easier if I handle the administrative details. I'm not that feeble yet, I replied with a chuckle, accepting the key cards directly from the clerk. Our suite overlooked the Caribbean, 3 stories above the rocky coastline. Beautiful, remote, perfect for an accident. That evening, while they thought I was napping, I positioned myself near the balcony door and listened to their planning session on the adjacent terrace. Tomorrow night, Bertha was saying, during the sunset walk, The rocks are slippery when wet. What if he doesn't want to walk there? Chester's voice carried the strain of mounting pressure. Leave that to me. I'll suggest the perfect photo opportunity. Chester's phone buzzed again. Collection services. I can't keep dodging these calls much longer. You won't have to. 48 hours, and we'll have access to the emergency funds from the insurance policy. Emergency funds. As if my death would be just another financial transaction. I slipped back to my bed, my mind racing through possibilities. They expected a frail, trusting father. Instead, they'd get something else entirely. 2 days of watching my children perform their caring act had been educational. Bertha controlled every aspect of our itinerary, while Chester grew increasingly agitated with each creditor call. They thought they were managing a helpless old man. Now, sitting in the departure lounge with our supposed flight home just hours away, I understood their final gambit. Dad, we need to pick up some last-minute souvenirs, Bertha announced, her voice carrying that familiar tone of artificial sweetness. Why don't you rest here while Chester and I browse the shops? Chester nodded eagerly, already moving toward the duty-free area. We'll be back in 20 minutes, maybe 30 at most. I settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair, arranging my newspaper and travel magazine on the small table. Take your time. These old bones appreciate the rest. They disappeared into the maze of shops and restaurants, Bertha clutching her purse containing my passport, Chester checking his watch obsessively. 20 minutes passed, then 30. 45, an hour. The departure board updated our flight status. Boarding, gate B7. Still no sign of my children. My phone remained silent in my pocket, no frantic calls explaining their delay, no apologetic messages about missing our flight. By the 90-minute mark, reality crystallized. They weren't coming back. I remained seated, occasionally glancing toward the shops with an expression of growing concern that any observer would interpret as confusion. An elderly man abandoned by his family in a foreign airport. Vulnerable. Stranded without documents or resources. Except, I wasn't stranded. During those 2 days at the resort, while they planned their abandonment strategy, I'd been making my own arrangements. The hotel concierge had been remarkably helpful when I'd explained my situation. Not the truth, of course, but a carefully crafted story about needing backup travel documents due to my children's unreliability. My phone buzzed with the first call at the 2-hour mark. Chester's number. I let it ring. Another call immediately followed. Bertha this time. I ignored that one too. By noon, my phone showed 77 missed calls. Text messages flooded in. Dad, where are you? We've been looking everywhere. Please answer your phone. This is an emergency. The desperation in their digital voices was almost amusing. They'd expected to abandon a helpless father and return to Dallas with a story about his tragic disappearance. Instead, they had discovered that their victim had vanished from the airport entirely. I finally answered on the 78th call. Chester, I said, injecting just the right amount of confusion into my voice. Where are you? I've been waiting for hours. Dad, thank goodness. We've been searching the entire airport. Where exactly are you? I'm at the hotel, son. When you didn't return, I assumed you'd gone back to pack. I took a taxi. Silence stretched across the international connection. But Dad, Bertha's voice cut in. They had me on speaker. We have your passport. You can't leave the airport without documentation. Oh, that old thing? I always carry backup copies when traveling internationally. Learned that from your mother years ago. Another silence, longer this time. We need to discuss something important, Bertha said finally, her voice strained. Can you meet us back at the airport? I'm afraid that's impossible, sweetheart. I've already checked out and made other arrangements. Chester's voice cracked when he spoke. What other arrangements? I smiled at the Caribbean sunset, painting my hotel balcony in shades of gold and crimson. Well, since you two seemed so interested in extending our family vacation, I decided to do the same. I've booked myself a lovely extended stay. The phone went silent except for their rapid, panicked breathing. Don't worry about me, I continued pleasantly. I have everything I need here. You two enjoy your flight home. I ended the call and powered off the phone. They'd expected to abandon me in paradise. Instead, I'd trapped them in their own scheme. 11:45, right on schedule. The children had been gone for exactly 15 minutes, long enough to reach the international terminal, too far to return quickly. Time to execute Phase 2. The leather briefcase had served me well for 20 years, but today its most important feature wasn't the contracts inside, it was the hidden compartment Margaret had insisted I install after her own travel mishap in 2019. My fingers found the concealed latch beneath the handle, and the false bottom clicked open. Backup passport, credit cards, and emergency cash. Everything I needed to turn their abandonment strategy into my tactical advantage. At the Aeromexico counter, the agent processed my ticket change with professional efficiency. Next flight to Dallas-Fort Worth departs at 1:30, Senor Robertson. Business class seat available. Perfect. I handed over my identification, noting how the agent's eyes never questioned the legitimacy of my documents. While waiting at gate C12, my phone registered its 81st missed call. The digital avalanche had evolved from confusion to panic to something approaching hysteria. Text messages flooded in faster than I could delete them. "Dad, please, we need to explain. This is all a misunderstanding. We're booking the next flight back to find you." I powered down the device entirely. Let them experience the silence they'd planned for me. During the 3-hour flight, I reviewed my evidence collection. Photos of Chester's booking confirmations, audio recordings from their hotel balcony conversations, screenshots of Bertha's travel insurance research, financial records showing Chester's unauthorized transfers from business accounts, transfers I'd only discovered this morning through my banking app, $280,000. Not just what he owed creditors, but what he'd already stolen from Robertson Motors over the past 6 months. The wheels touched down at DFW at 4:15. By 5:30, I was walking through my own front door, having beaten my children home by at least 12 hours. Margaret's photos smiled down from the mantelpiece as I spread my documentation across the dining room table. Financial statements, recorded conversations, travel itineraries, insurance policies, everything needed to dismantle their scheme and reclaim my business. My phone, now powered back on, showed 137 missed calls. I made one call of my own. "Milton, Percy Robertson. I need an emergency meeting with you and Herman first thing Wednesday morning. Something's happened that requires immediate legal attention. Percy, are you all right? Chester and Bertha have been calling my office frantically, saying you've disappeared in Mexico." "I'm fine, Milton. Better than fine, actually. What I need is a strategy session to discuss contract nullification under Texas law." A pause. "Contract nullification? Percy, what exactly has happened?" "Wednesday morning, Milton, 10 o'clock sharp, and bring your recorder. We're going to have quite a story to document." I hung up and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. Outside, the Dallas skyline glittered in the evening light, and somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, my children were probably still making frantic phone calls to Mexican authorities. Tomorrow, I'd begin dismantling everything they thought they'd won. The law office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected the afternoon sun like polished steel. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying the same briefcase that had enabled my escape from Cancun, now loaded with different ammunition. Milton Black rose from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary announced my arrival. "Percy, you look remarkably well for someone who was supposedly abandoned in a foreign country. That depends entirely on your definition of abandoned." I settled into the leather chair across from him, noting how Herman Daniels was already positioned at the conference table with his laptop open and financial spreadsheets displayed. "Herman's been reviewing the Robertson Motors accounts since yesterday," Milton said, gesturing toward the younger man. "What he's found is concerning." Herman's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Percy, we've identified multiple unauthorized transactions over the past 6 months. Chester's been siphoning funds systematically, small amounts initially, but the withdrawals escalated significantly in March." "How significantly?" $280,000, exactly matching the debt load you mentioned during our phone conversation. I opened my briefcase and withdrew the audio recording device I'd used at the hotel. "Then this should provide the context you'll need for legal proceedings." Milton leaned forward as I pressed play. The voices of Chester and Bertha emerged from the small speaker, their conversation from the Cancun resort balcony crystal clear. "Tomorrow night, during the sunset walk, the rocks are slippery when wet." "What if he doesn't want to walk there?" "Leave that to me. I'll suggest the perfect photo opportunity." The blood drained from Milton's face. "Percy, are you saying they were planning I'm saying they purchased comprehensive travel insurance that pays double for accidental incidents, arranged for me to be isolated in a foreign location, and discussed specific methods for ensuring I wouldn't return home. Herman's typing had stopped entirely. This constitutes conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum, potentially much worse. Milton activated his own recording equipment. I need you to walk me through everything that happened, starting with the business transfer on March 15th. For the next hour, I methodically detailed my children's scheme, the manufactured urgency around Chester's debts, Bertha's controlling behavior with travel documents, their whispered conversations about insurance payouts and medical response times. The beauty of their plan, I concluded, was its simplicity. An elderly widower, grieving and dependent on his children, suffers a tragic accident while vacationing in an unfamiliar location. The insurance pays out quickly, the business transfers are already legally complete, and they inherit everything with minimal scrutiny. Milton was making extensive notes. Under Texas law, contracts executed under duress or fraud can be nullified. This recording evidence, combined with the unauthorized financial transfers, provides grounds for complete reversal. What's our timeline? I asked. Herman consulted his legal calendar. I can have the account freezes in place by tomorrow morning. All business access codes need to be changed immediately. Already done. I updated every password and security protocol Sunday night. Milton smiled grimly. They're going to discover they're locked out of everything, along with discovering that their father has returned home safely with substantial evidence of their conspiracy. I closed my briefcase satisfied with the afternoon's progress. When they finally make it back from Mexico, they'll find a very different situation than the one they left behind. Herman was already drafting documents on his laptop. Percy, by week's end, will have everything legally positioned to not only reverse the business transfer, but pursue criminal charges if you choose. I stood to leave, pausing at the office window to look down at the Dallas streets 40 floors below. Somewhere out there, my children were probably landing at DFW, expecting to return to their inherited fortune and tie up loose ends from their failed scheme. Instead, they'd discover that their intended victim had become their prosecutor. Their voices carried through the heavy oak door, strained, urgent, defeated. 5 days in Mexico had changed everything about them. I adjusted the documents in my lap and waited for the performance to begin. The key turned in the lock with the same familiar click it had made for 30 years. But tonight, everything was different. I didn't move from my chair. Let them come to me. Chester stumbled through the doorway first, his wrinkled shirt hanging loose over a frame that had lost 10 pounds of stress weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his phone hung dead in his hand, battery drained from days of desperate calling. Bertha followed, her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor. Her usually perfect hair showed 5 days of neglect, and her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into her face. They froze when they saw me sitting calmly in my leather armchair, legal documents spread across my lap like playing cards in a winning hand. "Dad," Chester's voice cracked on the single word. "We've been trying to reach you for days." "I know." I turned a page of my notes without looking up. 187 calls, to be precise. Bertha stepped forward, desperation replacing her usual calculated composure. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We never meant to leave you at the airport." "No?" I finally raised my eyes to meet theirs. "Then, what exactly did you mean to do?" Chester fumbled for words while sweat beaded on his forehead. "We got lost in the terminal. The shops are confusing and we couldn't find our way back." "For 5 days?" Silence stretched between us like a chasm. I reached for the small recording device on my side table and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, crystal clear from that Cancun hotel balcony. "Tomorrow night, during the sunset walk, the rocks are slippery when wet. What if he doesn't want to walk there? Leave that to me. I'll suggest the perfect photo opportunity." The color drained from Chester's face. Bertha's knuckles went white where she gripped her purse. "That's not... We weren't..." Chester stammered. "Planning my accident?" I pressed stop and set the device aside. The comprehensive travel insurance that pays double for accidental incidents wasn't enough of a clue. Bertha's mask finally slipped completely. "You manipulative old man, we were trying to help you." "Help me? By stealing $280,000 from Robertson Motors?" Chester's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the sofa, his face buried in his hands. How did you find out about your unauthorized transfers? Herman's been tracking every penny since March. Did you really think I'd sign over a $12 million business without monitoring its accounts? I stood slowly, the legal documents rustling in my hands. The beauty of your plan was its simplicity. Remove the inconvenient father, collect the insurance money, and inherit the business free and clear. Except you forgot one crucial detail. What detail? Bertha's voice had turned vicious. You forgot that I didn't become successful by trusting people who lie to my face. Chester looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Dad, please. I can explain the money. I was going to pay it back. With what? Your non-existent job? Your maxed-out credit cards? I walked to the window, looking out at the Dallas skyline that had watched me build my empire from nothing. You've been unemployed for 3 years, Chester, living off my generosity while plotting my demise. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered. No, I agreed, turning back to face them. It was supposed to be much worse, for me. Bertha straightened her shoulders, trying to reclaim some dignity. What do you want? Money? We can arrange payments. I want justice. I held up the legal papers. Milton filed these documents yesterday morning. Contract nullification, fraud charges, and criminal conspiracy. The business transfer is void as of Monday. Chester began to hyperventilate. You can't do this. We're family. Family doesn't abandon family in foreign countries. Family doesn't steal from the business that feeds them. And family certainly doesn't plan accidents for insurance money. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. You have until Monday morning to pack whatever belongs to you personally. Everything else, the cars, the house accounts, the business credit cards, belongs to Robertson Motors. Where are we supposed to go? Bertha demanded. That's not my concern anymore. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. Though I suggest you start by finding Chester a good bankruptcy attorney. They left without another word, Chester stumbling like a broken man, Bertha's fury radiating in waves that could have heated the entire neighborhood. After their car disappeared into the Texas night, I poured myself a bourbon and settled back into my chair. Monday would bring the final chapter of this particular story. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom with the measured pace of someone who had presided over hundreds of family business disputes. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the assembled parties. 23 days had passed since that confrontation in my living room. 23 days of depositions, legal filings, and financial audits. 23 days of Chester and Bertha's desperate attempts to find legal representation willing to defend the indefensible. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Milton, my navy suit pressed to perfection, evidence folders organized with military precision. Across the aisle, Chester and Bertha huddled with their court-appointed attorney, a young public defender who'd drawn the short straw on this particular case. In the matter of Robertson versus Robertson and Hunt, Judge Williams began, we're here to determine the validity of business transfer agreements executed on March 15, 2025. Milton rose smoothly. Your Honor, will demonstrate that these agreements were obtained through fraud, duress, and ongoing conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The defendant's attorney, a nervous young man named Bradley Pierce, cleared his throat. Your Honor, we contend that this is simply a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Judge Williams looked unimpressed. Mr. Black, please proceed with your evidence. Milton activated the courtroom's audio system. Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, recorded conversations between the defendants discussing plans to orchestrate the plaintiff's accidental demise. The familiar voices filled the courtroom. Tomorrow night, during the sunset walk, the rocks are slippery when wet. 48 hours, and we'll have access to the emergency funds from the insurance policy. Chester slumped further into his chair with each damning word. Bertha stared straight ahead, her jaw set in defiant denial. Exhibit B, Milton continued, financial records showing unauthorized transfers totaling $280,000 from Robertson Motors accounts to Chester Robertson's personal accounts. Herman rose from the gallery to present his findings. Your Honor, these transfers occurred systematically over 6 months, with amounts carefully calculated to avoid automatic bank fraud alerts. Judge Williams studied the financial documents with practiced eyes. Mr. Pierce, how does your client explain these transfers? Pierce glanced desperately at Chester. Your Honor, my client maintains these were legitimate business expenses. Business expenses? The judge's eyebrow arched dangerously. Mr. Robertson was not employed by Robertson Motors during this period. How does one incur business expenses without conducting business? Silence. Your Honor, Milton pressed forward, we also present evidence that the defendants purchased comprehensive travel insurance specifically covering accidental demise, then attempted to abandon the plaintiff without documentation in a foreign country. I was called to testify next. Under oath, I recounted the entire conspiracy with clinical precision. The manipulated business transfer, the suspicious travel arrangements, the overheard planning conversations, and finally, the abandonment at Cancun International Airport. Mr. Robertson, Judge Williams asked, how did you obtain these recordings? The conversations occurred on an adjacent hotel balcony, Your Honor. The defendants made no attempt to ensure privacy during their planning sessions. Pierce attempted one final gambit. Your Honor, these are family members experiencing emotional distress after recent loss. Perhaps counseling rather than criminal prosecution would be more appropriate. Judge Williams fixed him with a withering stare. Mr. Pierce, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and theft of nearly $300,000 are not family therapy issues. She reviewed her notes for several minutes before speaking. Having examined all evidence presented, this court finds clear and convincing proof of fraud, conspiracy, and theft. The business transfer agreements executed on March 15th are hereby nullified. Full ownership of Robertson Motors is restored to Percy Robertson, effective immediately. Chester's sob echoed through the courtroom. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution consideration. I stood as the gavel fell, officially restoring everything they'd tried to steal. Outside the courthouse, Milton shook my hand. Congratulations, Percy. Complete victory. I looked up at the Dallas sky, clear and blue as a perfect spring morning. Not complete, Milton, not yet. But it was a start. The children's school photos smiled at me from silver frames as I signed the eviction order that would remove them from the only home they'd ever known. Sometimes justice required collateral damage. 6 weeks had passed since Judge Williams handed down her verdict. 6 weeks of watching my children discover what true powerlessness meant. The eviction notice lay on top of the pile, crisp and official, next to the bankruptcy filing Chester's attorney had submitted 3 days earlier. Justice had many forms, and I intended to explore them all. Bertha's frantic calls had escalated to desperate visits, her 2 children waiting in my driveway while she begged at my front door. 8-year-old Marcus and 12-year-old Sarah, my grandchildren, had become pawns in a game their mother had started. Please, Dad, she'd sobbed just yesterday, mascara streaking down her cheeks in the June heat. The children don't understand why Grandpa won't see them anymore. Sarah thinks she did something wrong. Through the security camera, I'd watched Marcus draw hopscotch squares on my driveway with sidewalk chalk, while his sister sat in Bertha's car, her face a mask of confused hurt. The sight twisted something deep in my chest, but I forced it down. Margaret would have understood. Sometimes love meant letting consequences teach lessons that words couldn't. I'd watched from my study window as she returned to her car empty-handed, her daughter's confused face pressed against the rear window. Sarah mouthed, "Grandpa?" and waved, her small hand leaving prints on the glass. The next morning, I found Marcus's chalk art still decorating my driveway, a rainbow with the words, "We miss you," scrawled in a child's unsteady handwriting. I hosed it away before the neighbors could see, but the image burned in my memory. Hermann had proven invaluable during this phase. Every business relationship Chester had cultivated over the years had been systematically severed. No consulting contracts, no partnership opportunities, no networking connections. The Dallas business community was surprisingly small, and word traveled fast about family disputes. Chester called my office again today, Herman reported during our weekly meeting at the downtown cafe we'd adopted for privacy. "Third time this week, still looking for work. And your response? Same as always, we have no positions available for someone with his background." Herman stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "He's getting desperate, Percy. I heard through Thompson at First National that he tried to get a loan using your name as a reference. That's bold, considering his current circumstances. Thompson declined immediately, of course. But Percy..." Herman leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The man looked terrible. lost maybe 20 pounds, clothes hanging off him like scarecrow rags. His hands were shaking when he filled out the application. I felt a flicker of something, concern, satisfaction. The emotions blurred together like watercolors in rain. Chester's asset seizure had been particularly swift. The modest house in Richardson, the leased BMW, even his golf club membership, everything liquidated to satisfy creditors. He'd moved into a studio apartment near the airport, the kind of place where the rent was paid weekly and questions weren't asked. I'd driven past it once, a concrete box of a building, squeezed between a tire shop and a check-cashing store. Chester's old BMW sat in the parking lot, windows down, because the air conditioning had failed. A notice from the towing company was tucked under the windshield wiper. Even that would be gone soon. His letters arrived daily, handwritten pleas for forgiveness that I filed systematically without reading. But I noticed the progression, expensive stationery giving way to standard notebook paper, then to scraps torn from legal pads. His penmanship grew increasingly erratic as desperation set in. Bertha's letters were more strategic, detailed financial projections showing how they could repay the stolen money, proposals for supervised reconciliation, appeals to my love for my grandchildren. One particularly manipulative missive included drawings from Marcus and Sarah, their stick-figure grandfather, conspicuously absent from family portraits. All ignored, but not unfelt. The turning point came on a sweltering Tuesday in early July. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I saw Sarah standing alone on my porch, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. 12 years old, walking 6 miles from her temporary housing to reach me. I watched her ring the bell again, then sit on the porch steps to wait. She pulled out a book, something about wizards, and began reading in the shade of my columns. After an hour, she carefully wrote a note on paper, torn from her backpack, and slipped it under my door. Dear Grandpa, I don't know what Mom and Uncle Chester did, but I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't hate us forever. Love, Sarah. P.S. Marcus misses your pancakes. I found her bus fare to get home and called a taxi, watching from my window as she climbed into the back seat with dignity beyond her years. The note remained on my desk, a constant reminder that my war had casualties I hadn't intended. July brought the final phase of their humiliation. Bertha's eviction was scheduled for the 15th, giving her exactly 30 days to find alternative housing. With no credit, no references, and no income, her options were severely limited. I drove past the family home on eviction day, watching from across the street as the sheriff's deputies supervised the removal of furniture. Marcus sat on the front steps, clutching a stuffed elephant, the one I'd bought him for his 6th birthday. Sarah helped load boxes into a friend's pickup truck, her movements mechanical, like someone in shock. Bertha caught sight of my car and approached, her face streaked with tears and summer heat. The woman who'd once commanded board meetings now wore a stained t-shirt and flip-flops, her hair unwashed and desperate. "Is this what you wanted?" she demanded through my passenger window. "To see your grandchildren homeless? To watch them learn that family love has conditions?" "I wanted honesty," I replied evenly, though my voice carried less conviction than before. "You gave me conspiracy and theft instead. They're innocent in this. Marcus asked me yesterday why Grandpa doesn't love us anymore. What am I supposed to tell him?" "So was I. Innocent, I mean?" She stepped back as I drove away, but not before I saw her shoulders shake with sobs. In my rearview mirror, I watched Sarah take her mother's hand and lead her toward their uncertain future. That evening, I sat in my study surrounded by Margaret's photos and Chester's rejected letters. 3 months ago, I'd been a grieving widower dependent on my children's kindness. Tonight, I was a man who discovered the price of betrayal and collected it in full. But victory felt heavier than I'd expected. The house echoed with 40 years of family memories, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduation celebrations. Now, it felt like a museum of better times, each room a shrine to relationships I'd systematically dismantled. Herman knocked on my study door around 9, carrying a folder thick with legal documents and 2 cups of coffee. "The succession papers are ready for your review," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Once signed, the transition will be legally binding." I opened the folder, scanning pages that would make Herman Daniels my official business heir and successor, a man who'd shown loyalty when my own blood had shown greed. "There's something else," Herman continued, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd become more than an employee. I've been thinking about what you said regarding a final meeting. 3 weeks earlier, I'd mentioned the possibility of offering my children one last chance. Not forgiveness, they'd forfeited that, but perhaps something resembling mercy. The terms would be non-negotiable, I said finally, my voice carrying the weight of months of careful consideration. Of course, but it might be therapeutic for all involved. Herman paused, choosing his words carefully. Percy, I've watched you these past months. You've achieved everything you set out to accomplish. Complete victory. Total justice. But I see how you look when Sarah's drawings arrive. I notice you keeping Marcus's chalk in your desk drawer instead of throwing it away. Victory might be hollow if it cost you the possibility of ever being a grandfather again. I signed the succession documents with deliberate strokes, each signature transferring power from the Robertson bloodline to a man who'd earned it through competence rather than birth. But Herman's words lingered. Schedule the meeting for August 20th, I decided. Robertson Motors conference room, 10 o'clock. Herman nodded, already making notes. And the terms? I leaned back in my chair, considering the photos of Chester and Bertha from happier times. High school graduations, business openings, family holidays when we'd all believed love was unconditional. Sarah learning to ride a bicycle in my driveway. Marcus's first steps toward my outstretched arms. Total submission, I said quietly. They work for you now, not me. Minimum wage, no benefits, no guarantees. They earn every promotion, every raise, every moment of respect. That's harsh. So was abandoning their father in a foreign country. I paused, then added more softly, but perhaps not as harsh as permanent exile. Herman closed his folder. I'll make the calls tomorrow. After he left, I poured myself a bourbon and walked onto the back patio. The Dallas skyline sparkled in the distance, and somewhere in that maze of lights, my children were learning what defeat truly meant. Somewhere in that maze, my grandchildren were falling asleep in unfamiliar beds, wondering why their grandfather had disappeared from their lives. Margaret's rose garden bloomed in the moonlight, the flowers she'd planted still thriving despite my neglect. She'd always said gardens required both pruning and nurturing, cutting away disease while feeding what remained healthy. In 2 weeks, I'd offer them a choice. Accept complete humiliation in exchange for the possibility of redemption, or remain permanently exiled from the family they'd tried to destroy. Either way, I'd already won. The question now was whether winning had been worth what it cost. They arrived separately, but within minutes of each other, Chester's 20-year-old Honda, wheezing into the parking lot just as Bertha's borrowed sedan found a space near the employee entrance. I watched from my office window as they hesitated outside the building they had once expected to inherit, both wearing their only remaining professional clothes. Chester's suit hung loose on his diminished frame, while Bertha clutched a worn purse that had seen better decades. 3 weeks of reflection had crystallized my decision. Justice without the possibility of redemption was merely cruelty, and I wasn't cruel, just thorough. The night before, I'd stood in Margaret's garden, touching the roses she'd planted during Chester's senior year of high school. Hard pruning, she'd called it, cutting diseased branches so aggressively it looked like destruction. Sometimes you have to cut back to the root system to save the plant. Herman had arrived early to arrange the conference room, placing employment contracts at each seat and positioning himself at my right hand. The symbolism was intentional, the new hierarchy made visible. "Good morning," I said, as Chester and Bertha entered the room, their eyes immediately drawn to the legal documents waiting for them. "Dad?" Bertha's voice carried a tremor of hope mixed with fear. She'd lost weight since the eviction, her cheekbones sharp in a face that had once been full and confident. Chester remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. The man who'd once commanded attention at business lunches now seemed to fold in on himself, shoulders curved in permanent defeat. "Please, sit." I gestured to the chairs across from us, maintaining the distance of authority. "I assume you understand why you're here. You said something about employment opportunities," Bertha ventured, her voice carrying the carefully modulated tone of someone who'd learned to beg with dignity. "Herman has employment opportunities. I have terms for a very limited reconciliation." Herman leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority I'd invested in him over months of careful preparation. "Robertson Motors is prepared to offer you both positions, entry-level positions, with the understanding that your employment serves entirely at my discretion. Chester's head snapped up for the first time since entering the room. Entry-level? Warehouse work for you, Herman continued, consulting his notes with professional precision. Inventory management, shipping, receiving. You'll start at 7 a.m., work 8-hour shifts, 40 hours per week. Minimum wage, no health benefits for the first year, no paid time off for 6 months. The silence stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. And me? Bertha asked, her knuckles white where she gripped her purse handle. Customer service, phone support, appointment scheduling, dealing with service complaints, same compensation structure, same probationary period. Herman's voice remained steady, matter of fact. You'll both report directly to department supervisors, people who have been with the company for years and have no knowledge of your family connection. I watched their faces process the humiliation. 6 months ago, they had expected to own this company. Chester had imagined corner offices and profit sharing. Bertha had planned to modernize operations and implement her business school theories. Now they were being offered the positions typically reserved for high school graduates and community college dropouts. These aren't negotiable terms, I clarified, my voice cutting through their shocked silence. You work under Herman's supervision. You report to him, not to me. Any advancement depends entirely on your performance and his assessment of your character development. Performance and character development, Chester repeated numbly, as if testing foreign words on his tongue. The money you stole has been recovered, but trust. I shook my head slowly. Trust is earned in small increments over long periods, daily choices, weekly consistency, monthly demonstrations of reliability. Bertha leaned forward desperately, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. What about the children? Marcus asks about you every day. Sarah, she writes you letters that she's too afraid to send. The mention of my grandchildren hit like a physical blow, but I'd prepared for this moment. My relationship with my grandchildren will be rebuilt separately, assuming you demonstrate genuine change rather than continued manipulation. How can we prove change if you won't see us outside of work? Bertha's voice carried a note of rising panic. That's exactly the point, Herman interjected. Your previous relationship with Percy was built on family obligation and financial dependence. This relationship will be built on earned respect and demonstrated reliability. The contracts Herman had prepared were extensive, 43 pages outlining not just employment terms, but behavioral expectations, financial monitoring, and psychological evaluation requirements. You'll submit to quarterly reviews, Herman explained, turning pages with bureaucratic efficiency. Any hint of dishonesty, any attempt to subvert company policies or use your family connection for advantage results in immediate termination and permanent exile. Financial monitoring means what exactly? Chester asked, his voice hoarse. Monthly budget reviews. You'll demonstrate how every dollar is spent, prove you're living within your means, show progress toward financial responsibility. I leaned forward slightly. No credit cards, no loans above $500 without approval, no major purchases without documentation. You're treating us like children, Bertha protested. Children who conspired to commit insurance fraud and elder abuse, I reminded her. These terms are generous, considering the alternative was criminal prosecution. Herman pushed the contracts across the table with the ceremony of a surrender document. These positions begin Monday morning at 7 a.m. You'll work 40-hour weeks, receive performance evaluations monthly, and undergo annual psychological assessments to monitor your rehabilitation. Psychological assessments, Bertha whispered, the words carrying the weight of complete defeat. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, a licensed psychologist who specializes in family therapy and trust rehabilitation, Herman explained. She'll evaluate your progress in understanding the gravity of your actions and your capacity for genuine change. Chester picked up a pen with shaking hands. What guarantee do we have that this isn't just elaborate revenge? That you won't find excuses to fire us no matter how hard we try? I considered the question while studying the man who'd once been my pride and joy. The son I'd imagined taking over the family business through merit rather than desperation. No guarantees, I said finally. Just like I had no guarantee you wouldn't abandon me in a foreign country after stealing my money. Trust works both ways, Chester. You destroyed it first. They signed without reading every page, desperation overriding pride. Chester's signature shook slightly. Bertha's was sharp and angry, each letter carved with resentment. "Welcome to Robertson Motors," Herman said, with professional courtesy that carried no warmth. "You start at the bottom, and you'll climb back up one honest day at a time." As they prepared to leave, I made one final statement. "This is mercy, not forgiveness. Forgiveness requires acknowledging the full weight of what you did and demonstrating genuine remorse over years, not weeks. Today, you get a chance to begin earning that opportunity." Chester paused at the door, his hand trembling on the handle. Can we ever be a family again?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. "That depends entirely on you," I replied, my voice softer than it had been all morning. "But the family you remember is gone forever. This is what you chose when you chose betrayal over blood." "And the children?" Bertha asked, tears finally breaking through her careful control. "When can they see their grandfather again?" I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the calculating manipulator who'd planned my demise, but a mother terrified of explaining to her children why their grandfather had vanished from their lives. "When you've proven you understand the difference between family love and financial convenience," I said. "When you've demonstrated that your children's grandfather matters more to you than their grandfather's money." After they left, Herman and I sat in the quiet conference room, watching them through the window as they walked separately to their cars. Chester's shoulders remained slumped in defeat. Bertha walked with rigid determination, already planning how to survive this humiliation. "Think they'll make it?" Herman asked, loosening his tie in the August heat. I considered the question while observing Chester's methodical car maintenance, checking his oil, topping off the radiator. Financial desperation had taught him caution he'd never possessed in prosperity. "Chester might," I said finally. "Bertha will struggle with the loss of control, but she's strong. The question is whether they can learn humility without losing hope. And the grandchildren? Time will tell." I gathered the signed contracts, evidence of complete victory achieved through patience and strategy. But for the first time in months, there's at least the possibility of redemption. Herman smiled slightly, packing his briefcase with satisfied efficiency. Conditional mercy. Margaret would have approved. Outside, my children drove away to begin their new lives as employees rather than heirs, their futures entirely dependent on choices they'd make one honest day at a time. I'd won everything I'd sought: justice, control, and the preservation of my life's work. Whether I'd ultimately win back my family remained to be seen. But perhaps, for the first time since that March evening, when I'd signed away my business, there was hope for something better than mere victory. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.